Hey, what's going on? Jake here with Uncommon EDC, and today we're checking out the Bear & Sons Shark Mouth Barlow. This is a Red Hill Cutlery exclusive, and they seem to work together quite a bit. In fact, this is my 5th Bear & Sons knife that's a Red Hill Cutlery exclusive. The first one I'm doing a video on the channel, and so those others will come in due time, but not the first Red Hill Cutlery exclusive I've done. That was actually the Case Small Congress, this year's vault pattern for 2023. This one has some bourbon barrel aged white oak covers and that really cool shield, a tiny shield, but a very cool bourbon barrel shield with the XX stamp on it. So that one already has its own video, but let's get back to the knife we're talking about today, starting with that box art. Really cool looking box art, features Red Hill Cutlery a lot more prominently than Bear & Sons. That logo kind of fades into the background, the Bear & Sons logo, but all of that is sitting over a background that looks like some sheet metal that we're assuming is a World War II era plane that's kind of bullet ridden, and on top of that we have the Made in USA exclusive limited edition, and then under here may or may not be picking up, but it says 92 Bourbon Trace, Radcliffe, Kentucky. And so that's a reference to Red Hill Cutlery, who has a physical store in Kentucky, not Bear & Sons. They are made in the USA, but they are made in Alabama, where this knife is made. And so flipping over to the end, we have that model designation, Red Hill Cutlery, the barcode, but no indication of how many of these were made. Sometimes in the Bear & Sons exclusives that they've done in the past, they are serialized. This one was not. We get a certificate of authenticity in there, but no indication of how many were made. With that said though, they lasted a decent amount of time. Originally they were $59.95, and after a few weeks I would assume they were trying to clear them out, and they ended up dropping them down to $29.95, which is what I paid for this knife. And for that price point, I think a really killer deal. Now, if you're not familiar with Bear & Sons, again, made in the USA, and they tend to be a little bit cheaper than case knives, although you do see a little bit of a drop off as well. So similar models, you're looking at like $10 to $15 cheaper typically, sometimes even a little bit more than that. And this example I think is a very good example in terms of what we usually get from Bear & Sons. And so in terms of that fit and finish, the transition between the bolster and the cover is completely seamless. All of those pins are 100% flush on both sides. The natural bone covers look excellent. If you're looking past the art, you see some of those imperfections that come with natural bone and really give it its character. And the artwork on there is really well done, extremely precise, matches exactly on both sides. It is engraved in there, so you feel a little bit of texturing, but nothing super significant. It's not super deep, and the dye that they use stayed within the lines perfectly. We don't see it bleeding out anywhere, and so really well done. We also have these nickel silver bolsters. On the show side, we have this etching that kind of reminds me of like a military rank insignia. I don't know if that's exactly what it is, but I would assume that was kind of the inspiration behind it. In fact, we do see that, a colorized version of that on the box itself as well. Flipping over to that pal side, not present. So that's really the only difference between the show side and the pal side there. Now, when it comes to imperfections here, the major one that you'll notice is this gap between the spring and the liner. It's not super significant. You don't really feel it that much, but it's definitely visual. You also see a gap between the liner and that pal side cover, and that's due to some damage on the bone itself. And so it's sitting correctly. There's just a little bit of damage to the bone, creating the appearance of that gap. And it doesn't really affect the quality of that shield. It's not like wobbly or anything. I don't think it's going to cause any long-term issues or cracking. And for a $30 USA made knife, not something that I'm even the least bit concerned about, but I always like to point that stuff out because there are people who care about that a lot more than I do, and so I don't want to give the impression that this is perfect. It's just good enough for me. Now, centering, we're right down the center. That's perfectly done, and the action on this is what I've come to expect for the most part, again from Bear & Sons, but maybe even a little bit better. So talking about that, usually when I get a Bear & Sons, their fit and finish is similar to cases for the most part, but what I've found is that they're always filthy for some reason. And not just in the kind of appearance, you need to clean a little bit of like carbon buildup off the springs and stuff like that, although that's the case. Usually you need to flush the pivot when you first get them. I always feel like I have a super gritty action, and that was not the case with this one, which I was very happy about, because like I said, most of my other Baron Sons have that, and not just the Red Hill Cutlery exclusive ones, other Baron Sons that I have feel exactly the same. So I've kind of come to expect that, and that was not the case with this one. Now, the other thing that's usually pretty standard with Baron Sons, and is the case with this one, is that the pull is a lot lighter than I personally would prefer. You know, that may be some people's preference. I don't usually give a number to the pull, but if I were to give one, it would be somewhere between 4.5 to 5.5. It's maybe a medium. I'd say it's even a light pull. It's, you know, not super heavy at all, which I definitely prefer, but it doesn't feel bad, and the action on it is very good. It feels smooth, which I'm happy with. And the only other kind of issue there is that it feels a little bit lazy or mushy into that half stop, and so it goes there with confidence. I'm not worried about this, you know, closing on my fingers or anything. It stops there very consistently, but it just doesn't feel as satisfying as sometimes you get out of a half stop, and it doesn't have really any talk associated with it. So when we get into that half stop, it's basically silent. But you do get that talk with the fully open and the close, nice and snappy. Just in the half stop, a little bit lazy, but overall really, really good. And again, that's kind of a preference thing. Now in this case, I think it lends itself well to the opening. So you may have seen the nail nick already. You can also just pinch grip this. You have plenty of access to that blade, but the most glaring thing is that blade shape. So typically with a Barlow, we're gonna have a clip point style blade. In this case, I don't know the name of this shape of blade, but there's a very specific use case for it, and that is for one-hand opening. And I think it makes a lot of sense on this knife in particular because, you know, the shark mouth is inspired by World War II era nose art that you'd see on warplanes, and so unfortunately that created a lot of amputees, and so this opening mechanism is intended for amputees, and so I think it's cool that they included it on here. Also the only one that I have in my collection, and so cool to have that as well. But the way this works, you just put it on the pocket of your pants and you're able to use that with one hand to open that blade. You can also do it on any hard surface like a table, and I'm gonna show that with this cardboard box. Obviously I'm gonna be holding this at an angle, but you wouldn't be using your second hand here, but holding it at an angle so we can see what that looks like. But you just put that notch over that hard edge and apply pressure downwards. You're gonna stop at about the half stop here, readjust here, and do the same thing until we're fully open. And you see how easy that was to open one-handed. So a very, very cool feature, especially if that's really your only option for deployment. Now, looking at the blade itself, obviously has that weird shape, but the tip is just as effective as most knife tips. That was one concern I had with this opening mechanism, is it gonna affect the cutting performance of this knife? And I really haven't found that to be the case. The size on this is your standard Barlow. We're 3.5 inches in the closed position, so able to get a nice 4-finger grip on that. 2.5-inch blade, 6 inches overall. Weighs in at 2.6 ounces and feels like what a Barlow feels like. So if you've ever handled a Barlow, you know, usually I'll say it feels good in hand, and I like the way Barlows feel in hand, but if you don't like the way a Barlow feels in your hand, you're probably not gonna like the way this one feels, because it feels like a standard Barlow. And so not a whole lot to talk about there. As far as that blade goes, we have a high carbon stainless steel, so we're not gonna get any patina on that. And we do have a blade etch, which I'm usually not a fan of, but I think this one's very well done. It's classy and minimal. I like how small it is. So we just have USA and limited edition, and it fits underneath that nail nick, and so pretty small. And like I said, I like the way this one was done. And as far as the tang, we have the Baron Sons logo, and that is an etch, not a stamp. And so obviously would prefer to see a stamp there because it is gonna eventually wear away. But even with case, we're seeing them kind of move away from the stamp and do more of those etches on the tangs. And so that's definitely an unfortunate thing. But if we flip over to the other side, usually you might see the model number and maybe USA stamped here. It does say USA in the Bear & Sons logo, so that's not surprising that that's not there, but nothing on the back. So if I don't keep this with the box and someone finds this down the road, this is going to be a very hard knife to track down because there's not a lot of information out there. It was a pretty limited run, and Bear & Sons already took down their web listing, and so there's really nothing out there to kind of find more information on there. I do have a screenshot of that if anyone ever needs it. I do have screenshots of that listing saved, but yeah, nothing really out there on this anymore. The box doesn't give you a ton of information. It gives you that limited edition certificate, but it's the same one that you get with any of their exclusives. It's not specific to this one, and you don't really get any of the other details that you get with this one. So it would be difficult to find more information on that. So I always wish that companies would put that there, because as we know, if we're collecting older knives and you're not able to find that information, it can make it really difficult to track down any additional information if someone just doesn't recognize a knife from an old catalog or ad that they have. And so would love to see companies do a little bit more of that, especially these traditional knives. But in any event, it's not there. It's not that big a deal. And so with this knife, I'm very, very happy with it. It's cool to get a USA made knife for $30. It's this well done. It's not perfect by any means, but I couldn't be happier with it. And, you know, I wasn't even sure I was going to pick this one up. When I first saw it, $60, you know, I thought it was a cool design, but I didn't pick it up. I messaged Warthog, you may know his channel here. I believe he picked it up. I don't know if he's done a video on it, but obviously it reminded me of his logo. He picked it up and didn't really think much of it. I wasn't planning on grabbing it, but at that $30 price point, couldn't resist. And I'm so glad that I did, because this is such a cool example of one of their Barlows. This is their third Bear & Son Barlow I have, and probably the best example of them so far, and so really glad to have this in the collection. Would love to hear your thoughts on it though down in the comments below, and if you know the name of this blade shape, or if it's just a normal blade shape and there's a name for that notch, what that is, would love to hear about that, learn more about that in the comments as well. But if you enjoyed this video, consider liking, commenting, subscribing, hitting the notification button. I will link to Red Hill Cutlery. I'm not an affiliate or anything, but they have some very cool exclusives. So even if you're not in the Kentucky area, it's worth following them for some of these exclusives. If you are in the Kentucky area, maybe worth checking out. I would love to go check out their store at some point. It looks like they have a pretty huge store, which is cool. But thanks for watching, and I hope you have a great one. Take care.